He said, containers don't contain. And he had a picture of somebody that had put a pile of sand onto a flatbed truck and then a nylon strap over the top of it to keep it up. and that's sort of where we are at the moment. But I don't think that's the most fundamental problem. I think the problem that we're going to end up struggling with is how we manage the security aspects of the contents of images and containers. So if you take something like the half-bleed thing, how do you know what's in your containers and how do you go back and fix that?
Welcome back from lunch, everyone. Just to warm everyone up before we start, if you're sitting next to someone you haven't met before, reach into your pocket, grab a business card, give them a business card. So we're here to network and meet people, and I'm just going to get a few things ready here.
Thank you.
But still, it doesn't consider itself to be production ready quite yet, does it?
Well, it's at 1.0, so it does consider itself to be production ready, but there was a security breakout in C1.0.
Yeah.
And so their CTO is now sort of public.
Okay.
He'll say when it's ready.
Cool, the mic's on. Okay.
Right. And then that goes hand in hand with Packer.
Now, I'm guessing that half of you are CDNs passing competitive CDNs business cards, which is always quite interesting. So, anyway, right. So, jumping back to the title of today's session, Next Generation Content Delivery Architectures. And I'm quite excited about this panel. I'm actually going to be in this room for a couple of hours, and I'm trying to coordinate a webcast of myself in the second session. So, I've had a little bit of a funny morning. But anyway, moving on. So just by word, a quick introduction to myself. Some of you will have been bored to tears by my writing in StreamingMedia. I've been writing for them for about 12 years now, which I think is a little bit longer even than Eric. He's not here, but anyway. So, and I write about a whole variety of things, typically with a bit of a focus on CDN. I ran my own CDN actually with this chap on the right as you're facing, Steve, between 2001 and 2009. Quirky little CDN focused on multicast, trying to drive multicast into the open internet. Yes, there's a few glazed looks there. I also write quite a lot about cellular link aggregator, cellular muxes, which are sort of backpack and portable units you can put multiple SIM cards in to do backhaul from the field over cellular links. And the next session is all about that. So stick around if that's of interest. Done thousands of webcasts myself, built workflow. Currently run a software company called Ideas. We describe our work as software-defined media workflows. Clients include NASDAQ and Reuters. We deliver 35,000 live events a year for those guys. We also built Archiva, Freeview's OTT platform, Connect TV, as it was called now, Hybrid TV. And very happy to talk more about that. And some of that will feed into this conversation. So, my panel, one amendment to the panel. Andy is booked for this panel next week by his PA. So he sent immense apologies. He's with the client today, and we couldn't even get him in virtually by a live link. So he sends tremendous apologies for that. But that doesn't in any way detract from the caliber of the panel we've got today. We've got some quite enlightened thinkers in the sector. The original intention was to have a broadcaster, effectively a customer of CDNs, a CDN I'm sure most of you will be familiar with, to talk about their services, a hardware vendor who's becoming a software vendor, and I think that was kind of kind of central to this topic, and a software vendor. I think that's probably fair to say, Chris, a software vendor who is very specialised in what I think is coming. So. I'm going to let the guys introduce their roles and so on as we first speak to them, but this is the core of the topic today. CDNs kind of have evolved from being fairly dedicated network services into more dynamic services, and I think even the CDNs themselves would admit to being what I would call a platform as a service in the sort of cloud terminology of the day. So you're buying a particular service, HTTP, RTMP, whatever it may be, and that's effectively a service where you don't really care how the infrastructure works. You kind of pay as you go, or you have some sort of commitment to them, but effectively the more you do, the more you use their services, the more you pay. Up until now, it's been a relatively forward-looking, forward-planning strategy to work out what service you're going to go and offer. So a lot of the conversation we've had in the last few days has been about things like MPEG-Dash, what point will the CDN support it, and so on. And that's quite a deliberating strategy. You've got to plan for it, you've got to roll out the VMs or the technology in the field that can support that service. And if you get it wrong, you've kind of wasted quite a lot of your risk capital in planning for that. So I think let's start talking to the panel, because they're probably more interesting than me anyway. If you could give a brief introduction as I sort of steer you to the questions about yourself and your role and what you look after, and then perhaps address the question a little bit. So Richard, if you could, I'm going to sort of start with yourself, because I think most people have heard of the BBC. Tell us a little bit about what you've been doing with CDNs and your role with regard to CDNs, please.
Yep, so I'm Richard Cooper. I work for the BBC. I'm sure you all know who the BBC is. We have a fairly large presence on the web, which has been up and running for kind of 20 years now. Usage in the UK is about 60% of the online audience uses on a weekly basis. International usage, we've got some fairly significant targets, but it's been a focus for us, and it's kind of growing. My responsibility, I work in the future media part of the BBC, and I run a group called the Online Technology Group. And our job is to provide the foundation technology that the BBC's online presence is built on, plus all the distribution and the operations to kind of keep it running 24/7. In terms of our use of CDNs, actually we use CDNs for a whole bunch of things. We use them quite extensively. Now we use them for caching of page objects, and we do that particularly for just better performance delivery internationally. We also use them to provide very high kind of capacity overload handling for us for pages. So we're quite capable of delivering a lot ourselves. But when we get very, very, very major events and the dials start going red, then we can kind of pull levers, shift more to CDNs, and get them to carry more of the load. But of course, the vast majority of traffic that we deliver over CDNs is AV. And of that, the vast majority of that, of course, is video. And primarily, for rights reasons, our video delivery is mainly constrained into the UK. We do deliver some internationally, but the vast majority of that is in the UK, and the vast majority of that is part of a little product called iPlayer, which most of you are probably familiar with. And we use CDNs for video delivery in kind of two ways. In one way, and this is increasingly the bulk of how we're going to be using them, is as a caching solution sitting on top of the rest of the origin and the back-end stuff, the hard work, which we do ourselves. And for those of you who saw and present it, Henry Webster is in the back of us demonstrating what we've done to build all the back-end components for that. And increasingly then, it's about a good, solid, serious volume amplification of chunked delivery, HTTP delivery into ISPs. But we also use them quite extensively for all of those other protocols which we still need to deliver against. So we still have a bit of real actually, which we don't deliver through CDN. I think we've probably got one of the last ones of those, I guess. We do a bit of Windows Media because it won't go away. We've got a fair amount, but reducing amounts of RTNP. And we've got one or two platforms which kind of need special things. And I have to say, I think the CDNs have been fantastic in the fact that they have so many customers. The flexibility of the services they offer means that if it's kind of not core to us and we just need the problem to be solved, we can provide an RTMP feed or an MP4, and you can pretty well guarantee that they'll be able to convert it into what's necessary to be able to deliver it to that platform that may be causing us some problems. But otherwise, as I say, the bulk of the activity is amplification of chunks and delivering that in the best possible quality they can do into the networks that we care about. Increasingly, that's the direction we're going.
I can tell you came from broadcast because you use the term amplification of chunks. I like that. So.
My original role in the BBC was actually designing hardware, analog hardware, so I even built amplifiers.
Excellent. So, Chris, I'm going to come back to you in a second. Steve, I want to talk about current day CDNs and how you got to where you are today and so on. So what are the kind of key demands that you get today, the key sort of kind of services that you have to deliver for clients such as Richard and so on, and how adaptive are you when Richard turns up with a requirement for something quirky?
Okay.
Tell the truth now.
I'll do my very best. I'll introduce myself. I'm Steve Miller-Jones. I'm a Director of Product Management at Limelight Networks. and I focus on our content delivery and performance products, which essentially are delivering media, delivering objects, delivering web applications as whole things through the CDN and building the business logic around those things. I think sort of tracing some of the history, the term CDN now is used far and wide. So if you say Netflix have a box in a carrier, and that's called a content delivery network. I think if you look back in history a little bit, the content delivery networks were those that built large-scale distributed networks of some kind, and I think there are 3 or 4 different types of those. So there is the sparse distributed type of CDN who puts their equipment into other people's networks, and they join it together through those networks, or the type who has maybe a slightly more grouped set of servers that they run themselves, but still within another network that they're relying on to join them together. And you have the kind of network that Limelight operates, which is a private network, which is joined together and operated and owned, managed privately from the wavelength upwards, all the equipment, all the services, all the delivery. And I think where we're looking to now is we're seeing, there are some disruptive service CDNs coming in who do smart things. In Instart logic isn't quite different from what a traditional CDN would do, but requiring a client to be on the client end and some different types of communications. And some of the barriers to entry have dropped in terms of being able to buy hardware. Large, expensive hardware is generally available. SSDs are available. Bandwidth and hosting is available, but running it together at scale, that barrier to scale hasn't changed. And I think that's where I come to the second part of the question. The key services we're being asked to deliver from a bits and bytes perspective have moved over the years away from some of the legacy formats that Richard touched on, largely towards HTTP. But there's still a range of services required across and around the world for different reasons. So some broadcasters, for example, have government remits which state you must support all of these legacy formats. So they still buy those legacy formats, and they expect those key services and that flexibility to be available from the CDNs. And it's unlikely that if you're a newcomer and you fancy your hand at being a CDN, that you're going to go and support a legacy format. So I think being an established CDN with the layers and levels of customers gives us the ability to offer a wide range of key services, but it's becoming more and more focused on HTTP and HTTPS and dealing with the security pieces and the business logic that surrounds those connections. So that request response flow, what happens during that process? What other logic could you introduce that you're removing from your origin workflow, from your infrastructure, that you don't need to do, that you would have to scale to achieve, that you can move into a cloud infrastructure or into a cloud service or traditional CDN to do at the edge for you? And so I think the adaption piece then, you have to be quite adaptive and have systems and be building systems which can bend to the rules people need to implement for business. I don't think the protocols are changing that quickly. That mean the key services have to change and chop all the time.
So let's dig into infrastructure a little bit, which will segue us on to Chris in a second. So looking back on our old CDN that Steve and I were working on, we were very much a fixed-in provider. We had Windows Media Service, dedicated appliances in the network, and that took a long time to roll out. Had all its inherent problems, and we hit an interesting rock, if you like, at the end of the 2008, 2009, and we needed to virtualize. And as a small UK company, that was quite a cost, given the margins we had to deploy that. Clearly, those providers that had already virtualized managed that adaptability much more readily. And I think so. It's true to say that you're pretty much virtualized across your network. Is that broadly true, or is that putting you on the spot too much?
So I would challenge you to define virtualization. Of course, we use virtualization. We deliver enormous amounts of content at scale. So there is virtualization. It would depend how you define that. So. Okay,
so if we're taking a particular type of server platform that you're going to deploy out in a remote location, or a remote POP or something, you deploy, say, a Windows Media Server. Let's just sort of pick on an old devil. You deploy a Windows Media Server, and Windows Media completely drops off the map. Do you have to send someone out to reformat that box and put in a Flash Media Server, or do you send out a totally different image to that box?
So I think the fair way to approach that question is to say that use what is probably commonly termed as some form of SDN. So your control plane and your data plane are somewhat separated. So you're enabled to send some tin, configure it for how you want to use it. It gets used, and at the point where it needs reconfiguration, it gets reconfigured. But you don't have to send a person into a room to do that.
Okay.
And I think looking at if we take a very modern point in time, SDN is the term, but it's essentially that separation of control. You don't want to go and manage all your devices individually, okay? Because that's time-consuming, laborious, need a lot of people, and it's prone to error and risk. So you want systems to control them centrally. That then you're in tighter control of how that quality of service is rolled out across the network.
Okay, so SDN is my segue to Chris, really. So we've been looking at how you orchestrate a network using something like an SDN technology to manage your VMs, your virtual machines across the network. And that's kind of become something maybe people are familiar with if they've played with infrastructure as a service themselves, such as EC2, to deploy their own VMs in that environment. I know that the BBC is starting to use more and more of that type of infrastructure as a service to build out your back end. But Chris, tell us a little bit about what you see happening in the virtualization space and within the SDN space.
Sure. So I'm Chris Swan. I'm CTO at Cohesive FT. We do cloud networking. So I'm probably the outsider to this panel because I'm not a CDN supplier, I'm not a CDN user, and I'm not even really an arms dealer to CDNs. But I'm probably here to talk about where networking is going. So we've had a product in the market for over 5 years now, which is virtualized cloud networking that can be deployed into the cloud. And that's public cloud or private cloud, but predominantly it's public cloud, and it's most. And it lives at the intersection of software-defined networking and network function virtualization, and I'll kind of qualify both of those terms. So when I talk about software-defined networking, I'm talking about networks that can be configured through software, and when I talk about network function virtualization, I mean networks that are built out of software. Now, we made this thing so that people could do hybrid cloud, cloud bursting, those kinds of activities, so that they could take enterprise workloads and drop them out into the public cloud. But what we found some of our customers doing was that they were making networks out of the public cloud. That they could go along to Amazon and drop a piece of software onto Amazon and connect things into it and have a network. And they could have a network without having to have a relationship with a telecommunications service provider. And they could have demand, so they could have it from a telco. So what I've been spending my last year doing is turning us from a closed platform into a virtual appliance. And so a virtual machine, a sealed box that could be deployed onto Amazon, but it had no user serviceable parts inside. So our users could come along and they could configure this thing, but they couldn't change the way that it worked. And people were coming along and saying, my life would be so much better if I could have this extra function or that extra function. And what was often going on was the users had ancillary virtual machines attached to the edge of their networks that were doing special purpose operations, and they wanted to collapse that functionality into one place. So what we've done to enable that is we've opened up the platform. We've opened up the platform using a containerization technology, but that's now letting us allow our users to bring those additional functions and drop them in as containers. And because containers is becoming a big thing because of projects like Docker, it's not just a platform play, but it also becomes an ecosystem play because there's now Docker Hub, where people can publish container recipes, have a container ready to download and just drop in. So if somebody wants, I don't know, SSL termination or reverse proxy or content caching, they can go along and find those applications in the Docker Hub and just download them directly into our thing and have those extra capabilities. So I think that's a sort of taste of where things are right now, and we can probably talk a little more about where things are potentially going with SDN and NFV as we carry on.
We'll dig into that. So Richard, in your own workflows and your own infrastructure, you obviously we've had conversations about you're using EC2 more and more progressively and so on. Two questions there. First of all, do you do much direct delivery from the machines that are in the EC2 environment, or do you hand them out to the CDN still to deal with the sort of front-end herd?
So we do a bit. I mean, it's a fairly early journey for us into putting things into the cloud. And for those who've heard Henry Robertson's talk this morning, he described the biggest one, which is all of the back end for the video processing and workflow associated with that for iPlayer, but basically all the video and soon to be all the audio that we deliver on BBC Online. And we're experimenting, I think it's fair to say, with then for the audience-facing parts of the site, starting to put that onto Amazon and seeing how we get on. And we've got one or two bits and bobs there, but at the moment the vast majority of what we deliver is stuff that we deliver on premise. So we're running a mixed model. It'll be a hybrid model for, I don't know, 3 to 5 years. We'll see how long this takes. And so at the moment our model is that pretty well all the origin is done on premise. So even if the processing is done in cloud, it comes back into a single origin that we have on premise. And we'll see where we go with that, because I mean none of this stuff is cast in stone. We're actually learning as we gain more and more experience on how you operate in the hybrid model, what the best thing to do with each one is, how does that work from a performance and economics and security and everything else perspective.
And so, Steve, you've got a close focus on performance optimization in your space, and there was always an argument for using CDN to bring the content closer to the edge. Now, as organizations start to use EC2 sometimes for direct delivery, and EC2's got 7 or 8 data centers worldwide, maybe a dozen, which means that you're probably not as close to the edge if you're pulling a stream out of EC2 as you might be if you were pulling it from Limelight. Does your performance optimization offer a significant value over direct delivery from a data center in Dublin or a data center in Hong Kong?
Yeah, I think so. So just to sort of talk to some of your numbers. So we have something like 80 different points of presence in 40 locations around the globe. We have a network which can deliver over 10 terabits a second of egress traffic. So this is not all used for the BBC, of course, but I think the point is that if you're trying to deliver from EC2 and you know that they're local to where that data center might be, that part of EC2 is, then maybe you're going to get a similar kind of latency to what we can get in that same area. But then the challenge then comes essentially is you're trying to do two things and do them with consistency and high availability, and that's to stretch out further and further afield whilst maintaining the level of complexity that you've built. So without having to build more complexity into your own systems, being able to scale further afield, so with a longer piece of round trip time in between you, and being able to make sure that your infrastructure doesn't have to scale at the same rate. So if you have a marketing event planned or unplanned that's wildly successful halfway around the world, and suddenly your infrastructure is overwhelmed because you haven't planned for it, well, do you then build to that peak just in case it happens again? Or do you make sure that you can deliver what you need to deliver from that infrastructure and make sure that there's a service in the way that can both help you accelerate that from the infrastructure out towards the end and offload some of it so that it's working in the caches for you and being delivered much closer to those users? And then are you able to take advantage of services which can optimize for, say, how different browsers work and optimize for how image compression is applied for different types of devices? And what kind of logic do you have to build into your applications and infrastructure to handle those issues when browsers change 5 times, 6 times a year per browser? New devices come out all the time. We have different resolution screens all the time. How do you manage that complexity? Well, you could manage for your application complexity and let your CDN work out for you and with you what the business rules are for delivering and optimizing those kind of experiences. So I think the value in the wide, deep, large scale of a highly dense architecture like ours or a distributed architecture like someone else's is that you're essentially enabling yourself to address the total delivery experience that users are getting on every device. Okay, and you're not having to necessarily build all of that yourself. You don't have to scale to your one peak a year that you're going to get and not see again, and you're still going to be successful. And you can focus on what you want to be good at doing, whether you're doing it in a cloud or whether you're doing it in a private environment or however you're doing that. You can focus there and you can make sure that that experience is delivered consistently with high availability where your audience actually is. And I think that's the value proposition.
And how adaptive is that environment? You sort of talk about 4, 5, 6 upgrades over the course of a year with different browsers being released and so on. How much forward planning, how much deployment time is that taking you to evolve your CDN? Is that something that is measured in years or months or weeks?
So I think, to coin a DevOps term, I would say that CDNs are pretty much under a state of, I've just forgotten the phrase, but essentially, constant release, right? So, the services, the core software functionality may not be changing very quickly, but there'll be consistent releases across your roadmap. But I think the kind of features I'm talking about are things like, well, let's use, on request to the edge, let's use a rule that analyzes the device type or a cookie value or a query string or part of the URL and makes a decision based on your business logic. And giving you the tools, the APIs to control what that logic is, means that no one has to release any software to cater for the new browser. They have to go, okay, we've got a new browser type. Well, if we see this user agent, then let's do X. Well, let's serve a different object. Let's change our cache key. Let's add a query string. Let's add a header. Yeah, and it's enabling that business logic to happen rather than have to go and go, oh, we've got to develop some new software. So we're then behind the curve. But CDNs themselves are constantly developing their software and services. So, we have a lot of value-added services, workflow services that you'd add on to your video workflows. We have a lot of storage pieces. We have distributed cloud storage in all of our 80 locations. Amazon have 11 locations. So, that's all constantly evolving. So I don't think the idea that CDNs are, this immovable tanker that's going that way and that's the way we're going to go is quite, maybe back to your first question, that's a very old idea of CDNs, I think.
And so I'm going to sort of throw this one back over to Richard, actually, and this is going to put Steve on the spot in a strange way. Do you feel that you push your CDN to deliver new services, or do you feel that the CDN turns up with new offerings? So are you pulling them along into new capability and saying, could you do this for us? Or are they turning up and saying, did you know we could do that, which enables something new for you?
When we started using CDNs, we were trying not to be on the bleeding edge because we were looking for something which was we could just take as being a traditional cloud service. It's something that just works. You could treat it as being a commodity. We're looking for something that operates at scale, and we're looking at something that we can get in place quickly. And the last thing we were particularly interested in doing is helping them or working with them to develop that stuff. That kind of wasn't what we were looking for. And I think to a large extent that there have been some exceptions, but to a large extent that's how we've continued to operate. We're actually looking for volume and performance, and we may be a little bit different to some other organisations in terms of the extent to which we've attempted to solve a lot of these problems internally ourselves. And I think CDNs then offer a wide range of products, and at the moment we probably use a smaller range, I would guess, than some others in the extent that we do that ourselves. And it'll be interesting to see how that evolves over time, because as this stuff becomes more and more commoditized, the need for us to get what we see as being a competitive edge in terms of the products we produce, the quality of the content that we get in those products, the need for us to do that ourselves may reduce as it gets more stable. It never gets stable, does it? As it gets more stable in terms of the products that are available in the market. Plus, more commonly available across multiple CDNs. And one thing I didn't mention is we run a multiple CDN model for our distribution. We don't just do it with one. In fact, we use 4, of which one of those 4 is ourselves. And so that also means that from a product perspective, we can chop and change, and where we have a particular requirement, you bring them up, you find out who's got the mature version, and whoever's got it, you integrate as quick as you can, and away you go.
Okay, so Chris, virtualization, you mentioned containers earlier. Could you give us a little tour and a bit more specification about what the difference between VMs and clouds as they are maybe today in the EC2 context? KVMs, it's up on the board, it's probably easy for you to read.
Yeah, sure. So,
give us a little tour.
Yeah, we've had virtual machines in computing for decades, and it first came along with the IBM 360. We've had virtual machines in kind of the PC environment since 2000. So VMware came along and they provided initially their sort of GSX approach to virtualization. And with cloud, Amazon came along and gave us a VM vending machine and called it Elastic Compute Cloud. And initially it was 10 cents per hour. And since then we've seen numerous kind of new different types of virtual machine being made available and a whole array of services alongside of that. But the model for infrastructure as a service has kind of stuck on this VM vending machine model, and that's the common denominator. So if I'm trying to take a multi-cloud approach, like we might be trying to take a multi-CDN approach, then you need to stick to that lowest common denominator. So you can't use the Hadoop services or the relational database services because they might not be there in another infrastructure as a service. But everywhere you go, you can get VMs on demand. Containerization is another technique that's been around in computing for, again, decades. So IBM have had logical partitions with their AIX and RS6000 boxes. Sun had zones in their Solaris boxes. None of this is new, but it's kind of newly reintroduced to Linux. So there's a project called Linux Containers, LXC, that's been going for a number of years now, and it's based on some work that was initially introduced into the Linux kernel by Google. It turns out Google have been the company really driving the use of containers from their own internal requirements, and they've driven this stuff right into the Linux kernel that we all have in our Linux machines. It's just functionality that hasn't until now been lit up. And a company called .cloud last year released an open source project called Docker, and Docker was originally in part a wrapper for Linux containers. And it's been hugely successful. So in the space of 15 months, it's gone from an announcement on Hacker News to something where they had their Docker conference a few weeks back, and they had 550 people showed up to the sold-out conference, but they had another 400 on the waiting list. It's a very big deal, and the DockerCon hashtag was trending globally on Twitter for the duration of that conference, which sort of indicates that they had some of the people in the room that I guess are the social media influencers, if they can make that much noise about it. Now, one of the security specialists who'd introduced secure Linux stuff into Docker had a slide at that conference saying, containers don't contain. And he had this wonderful image of somebody that had taken a flatbed truck and put a pile of sand on it, and then put a nylon strap across the top, as if it would hold the sand on, which of course it wouldn't. And his point was that at the moment, Linux containers aren't giving you the kind of assurances of separation that we get with projects like Zen, which Amazon based its cloud on. And Zen in turn relies upon hardware things that Intel introduced into the hardware to make VMs work better. So containers don't have that hardware assist yet, and containers haven't been kind of anointed as sort of sufficiently weapons grade to provide that isolation that we get with VMs. On the other hand, containers are loads more efficient. So it relies upon you sharing a bunch of resources on the machine, and you can move the decimal here, roughly speaking. You can go to 10x better memory efficiency by taking a containers approach versus a VMs approach. And back when I was doing corporate finance, I used to define disruptive as moving the decimal. So containers are going to be disruptive to the cloud environment, because if instead of getting a virtual machine for 10 cents as it was, and it's now 2 cents, I can get a container that does the same job as my virtual machine for 1/10 of a penny per hour, and I can then be billed for that maybe by the minute, then suddenly the economics have changed dramatically. And all kinds of sort of Jevons paradoxes effects kick in, and people find ways of using things in ways that they didn't do before because it wasn't previously economical. So I think we're on the cusp of quite a big disruption because of that.
I think it was worth highlighting some experiments we've been doing internally in our company. You can fire up a container, a KVM machine in microseconds, where VMs are taking 30 seconds, 20 seconds to boot up, which may not be useful if you're changing your network every 3 years or 3 months. But if you're trying to do something highly dynamic and highly resource efficient, that is going to make a step change of difference, I think. So leading on from that, do you, Richard, see that type of change having a bearing on your architecture? Do you have a need to make changes to your resources in, well, do you think you could benefit, you may not be doing it today, but do you think you could benefit from being able to completely switch your own in-house resource utilization from one type of service delivery to another in a faster period of time?
So you say in-house. I mean, it's unlikely. This is really cool technology, and I would love to be building some of this stuff on the platforms that we operate, but I haven't really got an excuse to do so, because others out there will do it faster, better, and cheaper. And I think, you know, we look to ride on the back of some of the effects that you were describing there. You know, in terms of betting on the way this stuff is going to go, there will be more of the stuff out there. Unit prices are going to go down, and certainly the speed at which these things operate at the moment is not as fast as we would like. You know, when you do deploy something, it takes a material amount of time. You know, so by the time you put some of the back end stuff that needs to happen, it can be minutes between I've got my piece of code ready to go, my image, those minutes to come down into seconds. And also, you know, the billing granularity, but also the speed of response of these things. You know, you want to be able to scale up and scale down way faster than happens at the moment. I think all of these things, you know, potentially this technology provides an opportunity for that to happen. But I think the great thing about it is, you know, we weren't talking about Docker 2 years ago, were we?
Didn't exist.
I wasn't anyway. Good. And now we are, and in 2 years' time, I'm sure there's going to be a shed load more things that are going to be coming into this space. So it's an area where there's an awful lot of evolution. And while, as I said before, I'm always a little bit uncomfortable with our really big brands kind of riding right on the edge of that evolution, nevertheless finding the sweet spot that allows us to take advantage of it is the thing to do. And there's no doubt about it. You know, the technology that this stuff delivers a material benefit in the speed and quality of the things that we actually find that we can deliver. Certainly the speed at which we've been getting some of the things out when we use virtual technology and cloud technology rather than doing it in-house has been an eye-opener.
So if we sort of bracket up that as a workflow aspect in the CDNs, where Steve and I have had a few fairly interesting debates over the last few months about whether there's actually any need in the CDN space. And obviously this discussion needs to be focused on CDN, about whether there's really a need to be able to change what your infrastructure can do by the microsecond. So in the same way, I want to ask you the same sort of question. I think you know your answers have been very robust in the pubs, so I think they're probably going to be quite robust here. But
no, I wasn't there.
Okay.
I think you need to focus on what the CDN does and what the benefits of the cloud application environment are. So, you know, to Richard's point, you know, being able to go from zero to application complete in a faster time and have the scale and infrastructure to do it is a completely different game today from it was 5 years ago, because you'd have had to go and buy new equipment and buy a new rack and buy new power and install it and all that. But you don't have to do that now, so the speed of getting to market is much quicker. And I think that's, and the speed of scaling, if you need to the level you need to with that infrastructure is obviously a lot easier and cheaper as well. So I think that's a key point. And so I suppose the question for me comes then down to, you know, we're shifting, you know, underneath all of the business logic, which I spoke about a bit earlier, we're shifting bits and bytes from tin. And the question then I think comes down to protocols. So, and our software layer and how we deal with the protocol handling. So if all of these requests that we're servicing in these nice cloud environments are all HTTP, then why do I need anything other than HTTP? Is one argument. I might need some other protocols as well. We might want to be able to change things as we go along, and new protocols come into play, or there's a different requirement for, you know, we need suddenly need RTMP where we don't have it. Then it would be obviously very key to be able to provide it at the flick of a switch. So I think that's where your question is. But so my question back is, you know, where are the protocols and what is the reliance on the protocol? And the CDN as an interaction point between the protocol and the application with its own application layer has got a lot of flexibility in it. And you need to then think about from a virtualization perspective versus, you know, line speed and network card speed, and how fast can you get stuff off the box at a machine layer. I think that's where the differences start coming into play, and what a CDN does when it shifts bits and bytes versus what your application layer cloud services is trying to achieve.
So the throughput is more probably important than the flexibility.
I think, you know, talking to this group here in this conference and thinking about what's happening this morning, and the conversation was everything is HTTP or HTTPS, then at this point in time, I think that's fair. I don't think it means that we shouldn't have those capabilities, and I think if we don't, and if we didn't, then I think we should be looking at them.
Key technology evolutions. Workflow orchestration, software-defined networking. Chris, could you wrote a great article about Docker and talking about NFV being, I think, I can't quote it exactly, but saying NFV is fairly useless without SDN. I think it's interesting to try to work out whether this type of technology evolution is going to be relevant on the distribution side, or whether this is going to be more focused on workflow, or maybe even just operator networks or something like that. Where do you think the sweet spot for SDN and NFV and that type of capability is?
Yeah. So.
Sorry. Actually, could you also introduce, or rather than me do it, could you explain what NFV is and network function virtualization on the way through that?
Yeah. So I'll return to my earlier definitions of those. So network function virtualization is where you implement networks in software, and software-defined networking is where you configure networks through software. And of course, there's a massive overlap between those two things, because frankly, who in their right minds would make a network out of software and then make somebody log into it on a command line in order to configure it? There are people that are doing that, and it's also it can be a fallback to deal with some of the operational aspects. But by and large, practical network function virtualization has a massive overlap with software-defined networking, because you want to be able to reach into those networks through APIs and configure them thus. In the last week or so, there's been some really interesting things happening in this space. So we saw Facebook announce their wedge switch, which they've pledged to give to the Open Compute project. And they're taking the same merchant silicon that everybody else has in their go faster 10 gigabit, 40 gigabit switches from Broadcom, but they've put their own software on top of it. And there's a couple of things I find very interesting in what they've done there. First up, they had a team of 10 people did this. So 10 Facebookers made the software platform on which they're going to be running their network. If I look at telcos, they've got more than that number of people involved in contracts negotiations with the vendors for their next generation networks, which are going to be SDN and NFV. Never mind standard wonks, Etsy and all of the rest of that stuff. And it's a similar story with Google. The other interesting thing to come out of it is Facebook have completely optimized what they're doing to saturate their peering to the internet. So they're going as fast as they possibly can through that piece of network which is most expensive for them, and then everything behind that is just about feeding that fire hose. And so all of the data centers are simply being scaled in order to get data through that kind of narrow window. And of course, there's an aspect of CDN strategy goes along with that. But they've disrupted some of what's been happening elsewhere in the industry. So yeah, earlier we touched upon SDN about being the separation between the control plane and the data plane, and that's the sort of definition that's advocated by the Open Networking Foundation, and that's sort of where OpenFlow is pitching itself. And if we look at much of what's happened with SDN over the last year, you don't see OpenFlow mentioned. So VMware had its NSX, no mention of OpenFlow. It's actually there, hidden underneath. Juniper had OpenContrail, no mention of OpenFlow. And then now this Facebook wedge thing, again, no mention of OpenFlow, and they're explicitly talking about a hybrid model of centralized control at some level, but also a distributed control plane. So each individual thing will still be autonomous to a certain extent. And they've put just a bog standard PC microserver into every one of those boxes to give it that autonomous capability.
So I think it's a changing space. We've actually, it's an engaging conversation. We're on the last minute, and I'd actually probably like to pass through this slide because I want to make sure that we've got some space for questions. So we had lots to talk about, didn't we? Okay, well we've run out of time because we've got the last minute. So I'm actually going to see if there's any Q&A from the floor, because I think that's more important. There's lots of new things happening in the CDN space, which is good because it's been a little bit stayed for the last 3 years. I don't think CDN Federation, which has been the only story that I can think of in the last 3 years that's really been interesting, I don't think that's really come to much. And I think this is going to start creating a proper infrastructure change in the environment of cloud computing, the environment of cloud networking, and so on. But anyway, before we finish, we've got two or 3 minutes just to see if there's any Q&A from the floor. Otherwise, I'm going to run to the back of the room and see if I've got my live feed from New York coming in from the next event. So are there any questions? Okay, if you'll excuse me, I'm going to go and get my webcast set up for the next event. I'd like to thank the panelists immensely. I'm sorry, it felt like a short session. Please stick around.
Actually, but
The whole show they couldn't get it right. And then you take that blue. The whole show they couldn't get it right. Oh no, that was not here. That was there on the stream. Nothing. Yeah, nothing. All right. Yeah, you get to that bridge, huh? The Bronx to Manhattan Bridge.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, so that's the one that we literally stop to let you pass.
Yeah, what else we can? Just checking the minimum delay is.
Hello, this is New York. This is Mark.
Hey, Mark.
If somebody sees this, just say hello.
I see you. Can you hear me?
That's me.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Oh.
We're getting through there, aren't we? So I hear good voices.
Okay, so I hear myself. I don't know how long after though. Hold on. That's interesting. Hello, this is New York. This is Mark.
Hello, Mark. Can you hear me?
Stopwatch.
Testing 1, 2, 3. Mark, can you hear me? No? Can you hear me? Where's the IFB? I can see it just flickering. Maybe we need to
I
give
don't
it more
hear you,
sound.
but I heard.
You hear me on
I
the
don't hear you in the
webcast?
IFB. I hear you on the return on YouTube.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Okay, so I hear myself.
Clearly not. Testing 1, 2, 3. Testing 1, 2, 3. I love it when a plan comes together. It's a very low signal here.
No.
On the IFB.
Still
Hold
don't
on.
hear on IFB.
1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3.
Nothing.
Okay, 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Let's try it like this. A little bit of a boost on there. How's that? 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. Still nothing. No. We're definitely sending on the IFB. 1, 2, 3. 1, 2, 3. You can see the levels going. In fact, I'm hitting the ceiling. 1, 2, 3.
You enabled the IFB on your end, on the other end.
1, 2, 3.
Yeah.
We're in a.
1, 2,
We're locked
3.
to
Hang on,
DOM.
it says
Oh,
here now, IFB's
Hold on.
got an error
Ah.
message.
hold on.
IFB.
IFB server not responding.
I think the IFB server might have previously
IFB
crashed.
server not responding. That's the message we have.
Okay. Testing 1, 2, 3.
IFB just literally got an error now.
We just got an error on IFB.
It's been good.
1, 2, 1, 2. Testing 1, 2.
Yeah, IFB says it's
1, 2, 1, 2.
audio channel is not connected. It's connected to a sound device.
Testing 1, 2.
It's connected, you said?
Not connected.
It's not connected.
The IFB
Looks
is
like
not
you're not
connected.
connected to a sound device. That's the message we have on our end.
900901.
Testing 1, 2. Testing
Port,
1, 2.
you have port 9000, 9001.
The live view link, I hear you coming back fine. We hear you in the room, but you can only hear me on the YouTube feed. Is that right?
You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to break transmission and
Can you hear him over the PA?
Okay, Dom, we're going to break.
Okay. Just reconfigure.
There was an IFB error somewhere, but I will leave that to your 20 cables.
Oh, yeah, finding in cables. 1, 2, 1, 2. IFB, IFB. One, two, 1, 2. 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. I love it when a plan comes together. Yeah, there's always plenty of time. 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. Testing 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2. 1, 2, 1, 2. Sorry? There you go. Just close these down so they don't interfere. Testing 1, 2, testing 1, 2. No, it's huh? How do you know? I've got a USB audio at the front going into here. That's the IFB fold back, and I'm.
Still telling me it's not connected to
Goes out of there into the USB dongle on the front, and I can see the level.
Okay, we did a little restart on our end, and we still have the same message that there's no, what is it? It's not connected to an audio device?
IFB error, audio channel is not connected to a sound device.
Audio channel is not connected to a sound device. That's the error we read on our end.
How does that work? Does that give you anything? Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2. Testing 1, 2.
Oh,
there we go.
Oh, I got something. A second.
Testing
there we go.
1, 2. Hey, Mark, how you doing?
It's looking good on my end.
Can we talk in real time?
There we go.
You can hear me.
This is good. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, yes, now I hear you.
Excellent. Well, brilliant. We've got a couple of minutes, so.
Thumbs up.
Yes, thumbs up. Okay. That's great. Right, I'm not going to touch anything else. I'm going to leave it to someone else to break.
Oh.
Bear with us a second, Mark. I'm going to go and I'm just
Are you
going to go.
streaming video on the YouTube version?
We just got a slate at the moment. We can go to video in a second. In fact, we'll just go to video now so that people who are joining know what we're getting. That should be good. Oh, don't you love physics?
I'm all set here.
Yes, now I hear you. Excellent. So just a couple of minutes. So, thumbs up. Yes, thumbs up.
All right. Now that you've set it all up, I'm going to move.
Stay with us a second, Mark. I'm going to go and. We just got a slate at the moment.
In a good spot.
Yeah.
How long are you going to be on it?
I think I'm on air for the thing is 1 hour, but it's going to be
a little bit of latitude to move. Just don't go too
far. Bill, he's disappeared with my slides.
Yeah.
I've got it.
Want to turn it a little bit, or? Oh no, okay, leave it. No, don't worry. No. It's fine.
That's more fun than slides, isn't
there we
it?
go. I see the video on YouTube now.
You've got some video feedback, Mark. You should be able to see yourself repeatedly going off into the distance.
Yeah, I see myself 2 times in full screen and then on a projection screen in the back.
We're projecting the preview on the mixer. We thought it would be more interesting for the geeks in the audience than slides. So. Good. Well, let's kick off.
John, the other thing is that I hear myself on the IFB, so.
A little off-putting. Yeah, I'm not sure if we can do a great deal about that because we're having to bring in the mics and de-embed your audio on the same mixer and then send that to the PA and to you. So I hope it's not too off-putting.
I may then take it off when for the moment I'm talking or something. We'll see.
Okay.
Or lower the sound. So.
Okay, well, let's kick off, guys. Cellmux.com. Thank you for coming to the panel session, guys. We've got an enormous audience here, Mark. Ooh, we've got an enormous. I'll turn this one away. We've got an enormous audience here.
The feedback.
It's feeding back, is it? Panama. I'll tell you what. Then why don't we do this? Let's see if this works. Can you pass this between you?
No, you don't have. Yeah.
Final tweaks on the sound level here. It's a good proof of concept.
It's brand new. I picked it. If it fails, it's on me.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
on, or can we?
No, go. It's fine.
Well, let's just assume it's working, and we can assume that the skilled engineers at the back can fix any nits as we go along. So, Cellmux.com, thank you very much for coming to our hugely packed room here. It's good to see so many of you have turned up. It is the end of a very good but quite hot and tiring conference, so I'm not surprised a few people have sidled off for a train here. Cellmux.com is proud to be the diamond sponsor of Streaming Forum this year. We took it as an opportunity to raise profile of ourselves and what we're about. We've subtitled Cellmux.com the multi-tool reference for those trying to get a video signal back to base on an ad hoc basis. Michael, who is at the back of the room here, is our operation and day-to-day editor for Cellmux.com, and he is the point of contact for those of you who are interested in the products that we list. The aim of the site, I've been writing for several years for StreamingMedia magazine, 12 years, about a wide variety of subjects, but in the last 3 or 4 years, the portable backpack units and portable compact units which you can plug multiple SIM cards into to create a single high bandwidth connection over a cellular network which you can use for live video backhaul. I've been reviewing several of these different vendors, and they're very geographically dispersed, and I've been increasingly asked for my opinion to compare the different technology types. And so we thought we'd pull together Cellmux.com as a sort of Swiss Army knife for people in the field who are trying to get in touch with the community, to ask questions about how to use Cellmuxes, how to use different techniques to get video back to base. We have a sort of membership scheme where the vendors basically just give us a little bit of turnover cash so that we can keep the whole site running. We aggregate their news. We don't publish any editorial on the site, purposefully so that we don't tread on the toes of my friends in StreamingMedia, but also it gives us the ability to link out to StreamingMedia and other magazines to find out, to aggregate those links into the product listings on the Cellmux.com website, and be happy to give you a little tour of the site on the Cellmux stand in the exhibition space if you haven't seen it already. We also aim to have forums. It's a geeks get together. It's an online club for people who are interested in this space. There isn't currently an electronic news gathering magazine or an outside broadcast magazine. There isn't a hub for people to get together and be able to just communicate. We're not really trying to be a massive commercial venture. It's a get-together point. So hopefully, if you haven't already, please sign up onto Cellmux.com. And those of you who are watching online, we've got 120 or so registrations out there. Thanks. I'm not sure which camera to look at, but it's good to have you with us. So, one of the parts of the project is to hold a monthly or around about monthly Google Hangout or something like that with the different vendors, so that you can get a chance to talk to them about their products, talk to them about how to use the products better, and just have some interface. And to start the show, I couldn't choose any one of the members or the vendors to kick the project off. I didn't think it was fair to start with any particular one vendor, and so I turned the screws on these fine gentlemen here, who actually know an awful lot more than I do about backhaul and about live links. So this inaugural panel session is really to get a high-level view about the changing landscape of news gathering and outside broadcast. We're going to look at news gathering workflows as they have been up until now. We're going to look at the key performance indicators on those live links a little bit, technology options that they have in the core, and we're going to look at technology options at the edge, which obviously will then embrace the Cellmux family. So I want to take, overall through this conversation discussion, I want to take a look at how IP and IP streaming technologies are disrupting and changing that news gathering workflow and that outside broadcast workflow. And there are probably no better people in this country than these three gentlemen, and Mark, who is currently in Times Square in New York, to talk to us about that news gathering workflow. So, guys, I'd like to ask you left to right to introduce you. Well, left to right and virtually to introduce yourselves. Mark, we'll come to you on number 4 in a second. So, Colin, could you give us a little bit of an introduction about your role and your sort of interest in this space? I think we're going to guess with the microphones a little bit.
My name is Colin Muir. I'm the news gathering technology lead for BBC Scotland, and I'm currently responsible for a fleet of 7 IP satellite vehicles and a growing number of mobile bonding units or wireless multiplexers, as Dom has been describing it, and it's really changing the way that we're able to cover the live news.
My name's Guy Pelham. Up until the back end of last year, I was live editor for BBC News, and that really meant my job was to look at innovative ways of covering stories live and upload around the UK and internationally as well. So that led me into IP news gathering and most particularly the use of BSAT and bonding technology.
Richard.
My name is Richard Westwood. I work for Sky News in London. My title is Head of Links, which actually is very vague and just involves connectivity. So I look after how we get content into Sky, whether it be IP or more traditional methods. But more recently, we've been looking at, obviously, working with KA and 3G, 4G bonding devices extensively.
And Mark. Find out how the delay works.
Yes, this is Mark Lapierre. I'm at Thomson Reuters in New York. And my role is really on a technology level for production, post-production contribution, and I contribute as well to certain digital platforms that we have through the different products, B2B and business-to-consumer products that Thomson Reuters has on a global basis.
Brilliant. So let's talk about, first of all, about news gathering workflows as they've evolved. Colin and Guy, I think I probably need to talk to you collectively a little bit because you probably both share a company that you've been involved with a lot. So could you tell us a little bit about the typical BBC news gathering workflows as they have been?
Historically, I think they're pretty much the same as everybody else's up until not very long ago. If you're talking about television, the only way you went live is if you had an SNG vehicle, and there were terrestrial links and one or two other things, but essentially that was the main weapon of choice for any broadcaster, not just the BBC. And I think what's happened in the last sort of 5 years, 6 years maybe, is that situation has transformed itself, and there are now many different ways of going live, not all of which work on every occasion. They're not, you wouldn't necessarily use a bonding backpack, for example, to cover, a multi-camera, multi-path story. You wouldn't. But I suppose the point is now you have any news organisation has a much wider range of tools to cover any story you care to mention. And it's not always one-size-fits-all SNG.
So did technologies such as microwave and BGAN and so on played into that scope as we've been doing the transition?
I mean, BGAN did, yeah. I mean, there was a bit of a BGAN revolution in international news gathering, particularly about 8 years ago, something like that. Yeah. Was when it came up, when the first generation of BGAN antennas came on the market, and I think that really did transform what people could do live from difficult parts of the world. They were very portable, and okay, the bandwidth was a bit low and the picture quality was a bit, but it allowed you to go live from places that you could never go, you could never have gone to before. So in some ways, I think that was the sort of the precursor of where we are now. It was small, it was light, it was flexible. It wasn't particularly cheap. I mean, if you do a day's worth of streaming over BGAN, your finance department knows about it quite quickly. But it did transform what broadcasters were able to do.
And Richard, is the Sky workflow always going to be identical, or broadcaster generically going to use identical workflows, or do you have nuances that you're aware of?
No. I mean, believe it or not, BBC, Sky, and ITN actually work very closely together. We talk to each other. We see what each other are doing, and you follow. Yeah. So the workflow is very similar, and SNG was the de facto. Obviously, fixed infrastructure fiber networks for places you do day in, day out. As Guy said, the BGAN transformed international use. You can literally take it anywhere. And it was the forerunner of what we're now seeing with 3G, 4G bonding devices, Wi-Fi connectivity, even the humble iPhone. There's an app on there that we can use that we can stream live video to air.
And Mark, I will have to sort of to allow for a little bit of latency, but Mark, in the Reuters model, you're obviously more of a news agency providing news into broadcasters internationally. Do you face specific challenges in your own news gathering and news aggregation workflow that might be specific to being an agency as opposed to being a direct-to-air broadcaster?
Well, there's certainly the part that we address almost on a daily basis is the part where the reporter, the journalist is in the field in a hostile environment. So those situations are the ones where you need to be really agile, and we've seen all these technologies being used. Like we use the BGAN, and we use like streaming technologies with cellular bonding. Obviously, there's regions that's more difficult than others. We do the store and forward in such cases as well, but it's really an evolution. When you go back to that BGAN phone or transmission mechanism, and you look at what you're able to do today and the mobility that you achieve with those systems that basically fit in a pocket or in a suitcase, it's really something that has helped us cover areas of the world that otherwise would be a lot more difficult. And we do have trucks here and there, but it's not something that now we rely on all areas for news coverage. So it's a major advantage now to have something lightweight and easy to carry around.
So until the advent of IP in the Reuters analogy, or the Reuters model, I presume it was quite difficult to find a consistent type of network technology that was available globally, and you would end up with different types of workflow for different regions, or different nuances in the satellite providers for regions. Is that correct?
We do have that challenge, and it still hits us. Like we use like SIM cards, and obviously those packs that we have or broadcast kits that we want to use in different parts of the world, they end up being some of them centralized in certain areas, and they're being shipped to cover certain events in the world, and then we end up with those situations where the hitting the ground running is what we want to be able to do. So the kit arrives in a country, and it's immediately recognizing the cellular network in that country. So because you have the proper SIM cards loaded. I have to say, at the beginning, there's been some struggle in certain countries where this is not something that you expect and necessarily prepare for, but then you have all these surprises when you get there. But it's a learning process that we went through, and now it's a lot easier. We know how to get into a country without having to go to a local store to buy SIM cards.
And Colin, how responsive does your team have to be? How much notice do you typically get? Obviously, for the crashes and the disasters, you probably don't get much notice, but for other events where you're going to take your outside broadcast technology to the field, how responsive can you be, and is that changing as well?
Well, I mean, in the past, if we were planning an event, we would have to allocate one of only a handful of satellite trucks. Traditionally speaking, our KU-based links vehicles would be very expensive. And really what we've seen with the availability of ubiquitous IP, it is ultimately that we can scale things up at a much reduced cost, and we can actually take our newsroom out of the central belt in Scotland and actually start moving out to the areas where traditionally it would be very hard to actually cover. So I mean, we're actually able to deploy a KA-based satellite vehicle to the Highlands or the Islands, and we get good high bit rate upload and download, and it means that all of our editing, all of our shooting can be done on location and filed back in the same day. And also, if we are if we are covering a festival or the like, we are actually able to take a very lightweight piece of kit, put it on top of the roof of the porter cabin or on top of the vehicle, and we have high bit rate live streaming capability as well as office-based connectivity in the one unit. And in fact, that's something that we did to great success at the Hay Festival recently, where we're actually able to take that approach and actually start doing all of the live broadcasts from location over IP, rather than actually uploading and downlinking and then putting back out. So we're actually straight to web rather than back to our MCRs.
So let's touch on video quality. I remember when I started webcasting in 96, 97, and I was kind of using 1x1 pixel quality video. The very idea that would ever meet broadcast was kind of ridiculed. Guy, you've probably had a couple of years longer than myself in the space. Broadcasters have, I think, have traditionally been in the sort of hi-fi end of the market, expecting extremely high quality. As we've moved through the BGAN market, perhaps, but as we've moved to these more edgy technologies, when has good enough become good enough? What are the kind of breakpoints, or have you received feeds that you've refused as a live editor?
I think the way to answer that question is the audiences now are much more forgiving of quality, video quality, when they understand the reason for it. So they know that if you're in the middle of nowhere, the video quality may not be that great. If they know that if it's a breaking story and you're maybe, as Richard said, you're going live off a smartphone as first response, they understand that. I think where perhaps they run into more difficulties are where the quality is poor for no very obvious reason. So, you know, if you're standing in Downing Street doing a two-way and the quality is rubbish, then the BBC viewer might say, well, why am I paying my license fee? But I think audiences are much more sophisticated about you know, what they watch and how they watch it, and they don't insist on something, you know, wonderfully HD on absolutely every occasion. I think they expect their studio shot to look good. I mean, they expect that to be good and HD capable. But you know, I think we're also not just talking about broadcasters here. We're traditional broadcasters. There are plenty of other organisations that are now becoming media organisations, newspapers, online digital news providers, and you know, they're embracing whole different sets of audiences, and they have different views again about what they expect in terms of quality. You know, if you're able to stream really good, effective news content onto the web, then people, you know, will watch it. In Ukraine, for example, there's an organisation which composed of a number of journalists who previously worked for other media organisations in Ukraine, and they essentially set up their own news service, and they were streaming really good news content. It wasn't particularly great quality, but it was valid and it was watched and it was appreciated by an audience that wasn't getting news from many other sources. So, you know, I think it's not quite as straightforward as it used to be. Broadcasters, yeah, used to be dead picky, but they're not anymore.
And Richard, do you remember? There must be a story to tell about the first time one of your editors or one of your news crews asked you to provision a cost-effective IP link as opposed to a high-quality fibre or something like that. Was there a particular point when that started to happen, or do you still sort of defer, if you possibly can, to the higher quality regardless of the cost?
Strangely enough, for Sky News, it was the transition from SD to HD. When the news channel was looking to go HD back in 2010, we then had to look at how we deliver content contribution-wise and how we could make the transition and actually get HD instead of SD. And funnily enough, it was that started us to look at the IP delivery. And from very early on, it became obvious that streaming video over an IP network was actually a cheaper option than the traditional SD fibre.
Because of the compression?
No, not just compression, because you're actually streaming video over an IP network, so you're leasing a data network rather than buying into a point-to-point dedicated fibre. So you end up taking on far more of the management of the hardware you're using, but it means you can set the level of quality depending on the bandwidth. So it was actually the transition from SD to HD that forced us to look at new ways of bringing content.
And Mark, I think the gap between my question and your response will sort of highlight will emphasise the point of the question. Latency. IP tends to introduce latency, not always, but broadly speaking, IP tends to introduce latency. Has that been a complication to manage in terms of synchronizing in the playouts and so on and so forth, or are there mitigating techniques now that allow you to manage latency in the production environment? 2, 3, 4.
It really depends on the assignment. So we have some sort of in the original assignment for the person to go out and do the event. Obviously, it's most of the time it's a say one-man band and with one camera. In those type of events, in the coordination part of it, we will discuss who's the customer, where's that content going, and we will adjust our system to basically cater to those customers. So you can have an event that requires a high quality and would not mind the 10, 12 seconds latency. But at the same time, we have journalists that we can take that signal to, and the text journalists would create snaps out of those live feeds. So they will rather have a lower quality, but at a smaller latency, so that the snaps that they are generating out of what the person is saying is obviously more timely. So we basically cover that in the assignment phase, where we basically know what kind of a quality ratio versus the latency that we're going to be broadcasting or streaming that event. Later on, if the event is streamed in a low latency, lower quality, well, we always have the opportunity to bring the recorded version from the field into the station and then ingest that content for post-production purposes, or reposting as a on-demand clip, those kind of things. So we tune it depending on our internal audience, essentially.
I think it would be true to say that actually the latency that we're experiencing here is quite a lot worse than we probably get on a news link. I mean, that's
about 3 seconds.
Yeah. So yeah.
The latency is adjustable. On most of the bonding devices, you adjust the latency depending on what you're actually trying to achieve. So for a live two-way contribution link, we will often sacrifice quality to reduce the latency to the bare minimum. And then if they want to, I don't know, do some content feeding, if we haven't got time to wait to storm forward, then we'll increase the latency to 12, 15, 20 seconds to improve the quality to get a clip in, and then FTP the material in full HD later.
So an interesting question, something it's an opportunity for me to ask, because I've not asked this before, but timestamping and synchronization, gen locking and so on within this environment, within IP, that must be quite a complex challenge.
Lip sync has proved to be one of the issues. I think we've all seen it. The stream will start, it'll be fine, and then halfway through the audio sync will just go out, and the only way you can get it back is by stop and restart the stream. So it's better now than it was. Certainly in the early days,
when I first started looking at this technology 4 years ago, it's come a long way to the point where actually now, as television audiences, I don't think people will actually notice that we're using this technology. I mean, in the past, I could look at a TV screen and I could tell, this guy using their supplier today, or we look at our output, we're using that type of codec. Now it's I don't think you can tell, and I mean, we're using it daily now. I mean, for example, from a BBC perspective, all of our US output is over cellular multiplexers, or rather, it's the first option now, rather than the second option. I mean, it's really changed the way that we, as an organisation, we can actually operate.
Yeah, I think as an example there, Hurricane Sandy, which hit the US a year or two back, I think it would be fair to say about 80% of the BBC's live coverage of that storm and its aftermath was done on cellular, back, on bonding kit. Because I mean, partly because I mean 4G. Let's be honest. 4G in the States changed the game. It's ubiquitous there, and it's very reliable. It also proved the point. Actually, it was remarkably resilient. I mean, normally when you throw a hurricane at telecommunications infrastructure, it tends to have a fairly devastating effect. But actually, what we found was that it did affect things for 2 or 3 hours immediately after the storm went through, but it came back up really quickly. And BBC and other broadcasters were able to do a huge amount using 4G and using cellular to cover the aftermath of the storm. And the other plus point was, of course, those big satellite dishes had to come down during, way before the storm actually hit, because the wind speeds would have blown the trucks over or ripped the antenna off the roof. So actually, you were able to keep broadcasting longer than you would have otherwise.
And so, Mark, you must have an extensive global crew, operatives out in the field who are deploying technologies and so on. Is this kit easy to use? Has it become easier to use? Is it a skilled job that do you need to have fairly high caliber engineers in the field, or can you have the high caliber engineers in the core and just send out red button technologies at this stage?
Wow. No, I think the quality at the capture is always basically the key. So you can't have a system that basically lowers that quality, and basically you're relying on people to use that technology the right way and to produce the images that you're expecting from them. What we've seen is that the quality is maintained. I mean, it could vary because of the individual, but at the end of the day, these people are professionals and do their job to the best in the conditions that they are and with the equipment that they have. Our ratio of equipment, though, is that we don't have a large amount of systems that can do live streaming from the field. The bulk of our equipment has more to do with recording, putting on a laptop and in a store forward fashion, because that's the type of business that we're in. But there's an increasing kind of ramp up of the technology for doing live streaming. But the market that we're catering to is not looking for that, like in all cases. So, but the quality has to be there. So we do that through different things, like standardizing the kits that are being used, standardizing it on the camera level, those kind of things, standardizing on the codec, and obviously, like other broadcasters, we take the content that we have, and sometimes we do have harsh conditions to deal with and quality that is not necessarily the best, and sometimes it happens on a mobile phone, but this is the image we have, and people understand that this is what's available for that circumstance.
It's worth saying that actually certainly the bonding kit is pretty simple to use. I mean, and it can be made even simpler. I mean, you can decide how much you're going to allow your people on location to tamper with it, to mess with the settings on location. I mean, I've come across at least one occasion where somebody who's never used one of these backpacks before has essentially taken it, gone to the location, been talked through it by somebody over there, and gone on air with it. It's not difficult, you know, I mean, I wouldn't recommend that, but you know, it's pretty simple.
You haven't yet posted kit out to people you've known?
No, but you ship it, or people will arrive in a country. You know, if you have a story breaking in country X, what any of the broadcasters would do is pick up the phone to a provider and say, "Can you give us a backpack or a camera back unit?" And the guys will arrive off the plane. They'll either find the kit waiting for them as they get off the plane or at their hotel, hopefully complete with sims that are working, and off they go. Easy.
Colin, do you arm the Edge team with bonding kit as a resilience and a redundancy option to take AEK, UKA type models, or do you are there redundancy? Is it used as a redundancy strategy, or do you tend to be saying, look, just go out with this kit?
We just send them out with the kit. I mean, I think it's the technology's now got to the point where you quite literally plug your camera in and switch it on. I mean, all of the key manufacturers in the market, you kind of literally set up their units to do that, and you can also remotely control them from the MCR end. That has interesting impact on our MCR workflows, which we're not necessarily ready to fully adopt. But it's the simplicity of this technology, and really, as Guy says, it's the availability of LTE, high bandwidth mobile connections that's really been the turning point. I mean, we've only got one deployed unit in Scotland for news gathering, and we started very slowly. I didn't expect great things, but now it's actually our main live option in Edinburgh. One of our vehicles is actually live vehicles is being used for the Queen's Baton relay coverage, and our main protocol when a news story breaks in Edinburgh is we deploy our camera back unit, and it's working very well. It's surprisingly. I mean, one of the key things to emphasise is that it's working now over LTE. But one of the things we have to do as an organisation, as an industry, is really start reaching out to the providers and actually looking to get quality of service, which is possible. The possibility with the availability of LTE to actually start guaranteeing this stuff is going to work in the future.
So, Guy, we touched on this on email before the session on the question of the operators' enthusiasm about this type of technology, and whether there was the ability to engage and talk about getting cores out of operators and so on, so that you could start doing that. Is that something you've already had conversations about?
I haven't personally, but I know that, well, two things. I mean, one, I know that I think at least one Scandinavian broadcaster has done a deal with a telco for guaranteed bandwidth. And I think actually the telcos have bandwidth that they want to sell. I mean, 4G take up in some places is not overwhelming, and they have bandwidth to sell, and broadcasters are willing, I think, to buy if the price is right, because as we all know, the one Achilles heel of bonding technology is that you're not absolutely guaranteed that it's going to work absolutely everywhere, which certainly in 3G days was a real issue. So anything that ups the reliability and guaranteed bandwidth would clearly do that is going to be an attractive proposition for broadcasters. Whether price is right will be something else again. And
technology, it's interesting because as the bonding technology started to appear, I remember about 2 years ago at IBC, I was suddenly introduced to the News Spotter service, the new KA-SAT services, and it is interesting that now most of the bonding kit will just treat that as another IP source and so on. I could see the traditional vehicle-based outside broadcast crew starting to think about carrying KA-SAT as their primary backhaul, because once it's locked, you've got some degree of QoS there, and then using bonding for infill. Richard,
yeah, no, absolutely. The 3G bonding devices, we started off as a sort of an add-on, but certainly for us in Washington DC now, it is the live content deliverer every day. And in fact, when we have hired local SMGs working SD and TSC and done that, they've gone, why aren't we using the bonding device because the pictures are better? And they are.
That's amazing.
And certainly in the UK, we know how to use KA-SAT vehicles, but they're actually using one of the 3G, 4G bonding packs, the encoder. it's using the kit to its best ability. And obviously, a 3G, 4G bonding device can be put on the back of the camera, used with SIMs, or you can go back to the vehicle, use it as the encoder. You know, if you put no 3G, 4G coverage, the vehicle will then give you the pipe.
Right.
And it's all about speed of deployment, and it's a cheaper resource, a fully fledged KU SMG drone. But it can also be an add-on. We've had the KA dish next to a full-size multi-camera production vehicle, and the KA dish is actually providing internet access and newsroom content for the journalists while the truck is doing the OB.
The broadcast.
So it's the mixture of the two.
I mean, it's worth mentioning Scotland. The balance has shifted to actually we've got 7 KA vehicles and only 2 KU. Actually, sorry, 3 KU vehicles, one for radio. And you know, the availability of always-on IP has changed the way we're able to work, whether that's going live or it's file-based delivery. We're able to do everything from the field. Our KA vehicles are edit vehicles on wheels that can also go live. And I mean, currently we're able to manage things like rain fade by booking a bigger carrier, say a 6 meg carrier, and only doing a 3 meg live in there to allow for to allow for degradation in bandwidth availability. But as Richard was saying, we're really now looking to move away from fixed bit rate to adaptive bit rate, which really allows us to get best of both worlds, and we can actually also start thinking about going live whilst allowing people to access the internet, and that's something that we've been testing a lot, as well as looking to bond across 2 separate KA providers to provide redundancy.
I think the ideal situation, and one can see this happening more and more as availability of connectivity increases, is to rock up on location and be able to suck up all the bandwidth that's there, whether it comes off KA, whether it comes off cellular, whether it's Wi-Fi, whatever. And essentially present that to the operator, or present it to the journalist or whoever, and say, that's connectivity, just use it. And actually, they don't care where the connectivity is coming from. They don't care whether it's satellite, they don't care whether it's cellular, it's just connectivity, and it allows them to do what they want to do. It not only allows them to push stuff back to base, but it also allows them to essentially extend the newsroom out to the field. So all those production systems that they would normally use back at base, they have available on their laptop. So the days when actually the poor bloody journalist standing at the live point was the last person to know what was actually happening, and the guys back in the studio knew more because they could see the wires, actually that doesn't happen anymore, or it shouldn't happen anymore. The journalist, should have access to the wires, to social media, for everything they want, right, in their hand. I think that's the sort of ideal situation we're all aiming for.
So, Mark, technology options in the core. A change at the edge often means a change at the core, not always. Colin's just mentioned adaptive bitrate. There's presumably got to be some degree of transcoding before you can introduce that outside broadcast feed into the broadcast environment. Does that mean that you're having to introduce the MCR and the playouts and technology in your core to a new stack of technology and a new set of workflows?
Maybe at the beginning, where we have the initial conversation, the coordination. Obviously, there's all like a chain of people that get part of that process to get the signal in. But after that, once it gets into the facility, we're getting signals from various regions. So we have the small bureaus sending us content. We have the large, and we use one technology for that one. We have other technologies for when we have like larger bureaus where we have like permanent lines where we feed to them, feed back to us, and then we have those kind of wild mobile systems. the going back to baseband to like HDSDI is kind of the common way to make all these signals from wherever they come into some sort of common standard. So we end up a lot with signals that go to HDSDI and then they get recorded into our house codec, into our system. So apart from the coordination side, the handling of the live video ends up like all standardized within the station or the office where the signal is being received into a single standard. When we get to file-based, well, that's also again the benefit where when the reporter or the journalist comes back with the P2 card or those kind of things, then we re-ingest and there's, depending on the crew that had sent that person, they will re-ingest in their editing system. But we see just an easier and easier way to get those signals in now, because we try to kind of standardize and have like workflows that are pre-established, and apart from those wild situations, we try to stick to things that we know and that people can react more efficiently, more rapidly into those situations.
And it's a sort of broad question. Do you get issues with matching, with metadata passing through the workflow? As a sort of general question to all of you, if any of you want to pick it up. Are there things that you've lost from the traditional broadcast workflow that if you were to ask the Cellmux vendors to add that back in or to introduce that capability, do any of you have capabilities which you feel would be nice?
I'd love to have Tally right now.
Tally. Okay, that's interesting. Are there others, guys?
Well, metadata in the field has never really been part of news acquisition. Metadata is more for moving content within the broadcast center. So, in terms of 3G, 4G bonding and IP delivery, it's not something that was there before.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's not something that we've missed.
Sure.
I mean, I think if anything, it's improved our ability to use metadata, because I mean, you can actually attribute metadata to the file and send it, whereas in the past you couldn't send the piece of paper you're writing metadata on, but you're recording over the satellite. For example, all of the information is there, and this guy was saying all of the information is coming back as well.
I mean, we had a conversation a little while ago about the workflow integration in the field. I just wondered if you could elaborate a little bit more about the fact that sometimes you need to actually have an external editing tool on a laptop or something to prepare content for push into your digital asset management and so on.
Well, I mean, absolutely. I mean, the availability of IP connectivity means that we're able to extend the newsroom out to the field, and as well as deliver, we're able to pull content from our video library, and actually edit that in the field after it's been downloaded, on our MacBook or whatever we're using to have it edit machine, and integrate that material into the content in broadcast quality, and then we deliver it in broadcast quality, albeit we depending on the immediacy of this news story, we may do some transcoding to be able to file send much quicker than we would normally do. But as Mark was saying earlier, we're able to do things live or quick hits in low quality and replace it with the full fat version at a later time.
I think, I certainly wouldn't want to encourage any vendor to make things more difficult on location. Metadata, the metadata can be automatically provided, and come as part of the file. Then that's fine. I mean, people, camera crews and operators generally on location hate having to fill in boxes. And sometimes they have to, but they hate having to do it. And if they could possibly avoid it, they won't do it. I just don't think there's much point in pushing for that.
I mean, something as simple as GPS coordinates and time of day have changed things dramatically.
Yeah.
Because everything is date stamped from the location, and you've got the GPS coordinates, so it's actually easier to track what file came in where than if it had been fed traditional method.
Right, it's coming blind.
I think one of the points hinted at is the change of workflow for MCR. For the MCR, the hub end, been the biggest change in all of this. Because most of the 3G, 4G bonding backpacks and camera back units now, what we encourage the cameramen to actually just concentrate on what they do and leave the MCR to deal with the technology.
Right.
Because once it's connected and you have a connection, it can all be remotely controlled from the MCR. So it's put far more emphasis on quality control and the technical aspects back into the hub end. And it leaves the cameraman to concentrate on what he actually needs to do, which is shoot the material.
Right. So we've had a couple of vendors in the last press releases through Cellmux in the last couple of weeks about vendors that are starting to release their muxing capability for software environments so that you could build your own application on a laptop. I'm just wondering whether that might be something that's going to, you think that's going to be, sort of broad question, that do you think that's something that's going to be exciting in the environment, or is that actually sort of, it sounds a little bit like that might be pushing the wrong way actually?
You mean building our own bonding unit?
Well, certainly, I'm not going to name the vendors at the moment, but a couple of the guys are you're able to now build your own encoding application on a laptop and have 2 USB dongles and effectively mux that link together, or use the Ethernet port as well, which bypasses the need for the pre-manufactured device.
I think that might work if you're uploading, content you're editing on a laptop, but actually, and we will do that, and so the ability to maybe increase your connectivity off a laptop might be something people will be grateful for. However, generally a laptop is not a very good live tool unless you're not moving around. I mean, the good thing about a lot of the technology that we're now playing with is that you can grab it and run down the road with it, or you can drive down the road with it really
drive
easily.
over it in some cases,
or even better, you can transmit while you're on the move. I mean, one of the USPs, if you like, of 3 and 4G is that it's a mobile technology. So you can go live from your car. You can go live from a boat. You can go live from a train. I mean, Colin was talking earlier about the Queen's Baton Relay. That is essentially what the coverage of that is mobile. I mean, it's a relay. It's moving all the time, and it was the same for the Olympic torch relay. A couple of years before. I can't remember. It was 7,000 miles around the UK, was it? And nearly all of it was live. Well, that's because the technology is a live technology.
That's absolutely beautifully segued into the last section before we take some Q&A. For the creatives watching, the non-techies, the producers, the content designers, I wanted to just have a little chat about exactly what you're talking about, the new types of shots, the new creative potential that this technology enables. Mark, that might be less relevant for you, but I'm going to start with you. Do you see in the news gathering space new types of news footage being enabled? Is that for the creators in the audience here? What do you see the cellular technology enabling?
There's certainly a time where you appreciate the ease of use and the how lightweight and how mobile you become. In New York City, for example, handling a truck and finding line of sight for a satellite, getting parking permission, those kind of things are things of the past. Like you go in and what, you get towed. So those kind of things. When you had to live through those type of situations, you look at today's technology and you say, well, no, you're on the go. You can be at any place. There's no like, oh, I need to be right here, and then you carry a 200 feet coax to the location where you want to be. You can be in a building. You can move through an elevator. You could put a little kit by the window and still be able to get a signal to be transmitting live. The versatility, the flexibility, and then we mentioned cars and boats and trains, like that gives the creative people the flexibility of the type of shots that they could only dream of in a OB van type of situation. So we see them basically asking for more. So, but don't they all always ask for more? But that's okay. But now some more time than others, we could say yes.
Guys, have you got favourite moments that you've seen captured by Cellmux that you could have never seen earlier in your career?
It's it has changed what we do dramatically. Yeah, absolutely right. It could be New York, Washington, London, Paris, any major city has big issues parking. I mean, we still use microwave, digital microwave, because it's still a very useful tool, certainly in central London. But the 3G, 4G has changed a lot of that now.
It's another cost saving in parking fines.
Well, I mean, yeah, absolutely right. I mean, it would be part of the trap, but it's the only place we can park. We're going to take a ticket, you know, and it's you take the ticket.
They don't
Every
take it,
time.
yeah. Fantastic.
The other thing worth mentioning is that the other advantage of IP is that it is essentially it's a multimedia tool. I mean, before, when we back in the old days, you know, an SNG did telly and you had a separate vehicle to do radio, and now actually you can do the whole lot off one vehicle, which if you're trying to run a multimedia operation the way, for example, the BBC is, you know, where you're asking a journalist to work across TV, radio, and online. The fact that they can be editing their TV package, they can step outside and do a TV live or do a radio live using the connectivity, you know, the KA-SAT connectivity or even the KU IP connectivity, and also, you know, work on text and essentially have everything on their laptop. It makes it a very flexible tool in a way that you just didn't have, you know, 6 or 7 years ago.
Okay, let's take we've got about 5 or 6 minutes left. Are there any questions from the floor that you'd like to ask us? Peter. I'm just going to repeat that for the webcasters. So the questions are, can you talk a little bit more about using an iPhone in this context?
Yeah, I mean, all the major vendors either have or are about to launch either iPhone apps or Android apps, and basically you use the iPhone 3G, 4G connectivity to stream back directly to base over the mobile network. So it means that certainly with Sky, all of our reporters have a phone that's capable of sending pictures back to Sky directly.
I think there's a number of organisations who are embracing this whole idea of mobile journalism, which Mojo, which essentially, you know, you use a smartphone or an iPad, but probably a smartphone, to do everything from shooting to editing to going live, and it's not a way of working that suits everybody, and it won't suit every story, but it's certainly, you know, broadcasters like RTE, for example, in Ireland are making some pretty good use of that way of working, and it's all off smartphones.
I mean, all of our news journalists have smartphones now, and they're able to go live into radio using voice over IP style apps. We're able to go live over video. We've seen the point where actually, you know, an iPhone can compete with an iPhone with a good bonding app can compete with an SD SNG track. I mean, I've had conversations with colleagues where we've done live tests and we've asked what truck we've used. I mean, it's really changing the way that, you know, our journalists are able to respond, and first responders are able to respond to news, and also, you know, getting into into situations where we would never be able to go live otherwise. You know, for example, lives during floods. I mean, Richard was showing us a nice live video from a boat that wouldn't have been possible in any other way. I mean, but it's also you know, having a smartphone. They've all got better cameras than most of our you know, SLRs are now, and you know, being able to shoot short form video clips and file them almost immediately is a game changer. I mean, I remember was it last year it was the Pope's inauguration.
Yeah.
I mean, there's an example of that. I mean, there was a clip of the nuns running to get receipts. which we would never be able to have got out, turned around if our journalists hadn't been canny enough to use their iPhone to do that.
And I think also it's the nature of broadcasting is changing, isn't it? I mean, the online competition, if you like, is really fierce, and essentially a broadcaster or any media organisation, they live and die by their content. And if you're able to exploit smartphones or similar tools to get content back from as wide a range of locations, featuring as wide a number of news lines as you possibly can in an affordable way, then you stand a much better chance of surviving in the new environment. And I think this technology is pretty vital if you want to compete in that area, because you're only as good as your content, and you're only as good as your ability to get that content somewhere where people can see it, and the smartphone can do that for you.
Mark, are you seeing uptake of the iPhone and smartphone in the news environment?
Definitely, those systems or those little cameras, essentially, I mean, they're everywhere. Everybody has one or two or three. So I've seen a lot of nice development in terms of live shooting. Obviously, the brackets, how you hold those phones, have always been an issue. But now you can have a lot of rigs that basically help you go along, walk around, and with your phone, it will look professional because you don't have the jerkiness of that movement that is normally associated with the small cameras, or like the phones or iPhone or Android. I mean, and we've gone through the other part where the personalities, the politicians, the people you get into that you interview, and they would look at you at the beginning. 3-4 years ago, we could still feel those kind of situations where if you came in front of them with a little iPhone, they wouldn't give you the time of day. That was not like seen as professional. But now these cameras are so widely distributed, and anybody can have one, and now they use it either to record sound or to record a full audio-visual from those interviews. And you have to take that content. You have to embrace that technology is going to go many more miles, and we probably haven't seen the end of that one. So as a content aggregator or broadcaster or distributor, there's no way you could say no to that type of technology, and in years from now you'll say, wow, this has gone a long way, and we're happy we did that. We followed that technology and we kept up with it.
So I've just got one last question in the last 2 minutes, and you can answer this yes or no. Has anyone done a live shoot using a bonding technology from an aeroplane? Not a helicopter or balloon, but from an aeroplane.
I think it's happened in the States, but the CAA will probably.
I'm not sure what the regulations are on it.
Yeah, they don't tend to like you using any kind of SIM-powered device.
In fact, quite a few of the manufacturers actually state categorically you cannot use their devices in a plane.
So I'll go back to my questions. Has anyone actually made a shot from a plane here? You can answer no.
No, we've certainly never done it. I've seen video of it being done, having been done in a very old aircraft in the States, but so not a fly-by-wire aircraft. Yeah.
And equally, the problem is, as soon as all of the 3G, 4G cell towers are all aimed at the ground.
Yeah.
So literally, as soon as you get up, we tried to do a live a few weeks back from a hot air balloon. The takeoff and up to about 500 feet was brilliant. After that,
interesting.
That was the end of the connectivity, because they literally up to 1,000 feet and you're out of 3G, 4G range.
Right. Well, listen. Sorry. Does he? How's he got CAA approved?
He's probably using Wi-Fi on the Wi-Fi antenna on the aircraft. Yeah.
First class.
Fair enough. Yeah.
You can
do it with that.
You can do it with guys who went to NAB last year, did some Skype calls mid-Atlantic using the onboard Wi-Fi.
Right.
So
yeah.
It's it's not everything's possible. It just depends on how much it's going to cost.
Yeah.
Well, listen, guys, Colin, Richard, Guy, Mark, I couldn't thank you enough for helping us kick off Cellmux.com in this way. Streaming Media Forum as well. Thank you for allowing us to be your diamond sponsor, and to this audience, this has been a great session. Actually, I'm really pleased. So, thanks once again. Join us for a tea or a coffee or an ice cream if you're feeling heat like I am, and we'll see you online very soon.
Thank you.
Mark, thank you very much, Mark. It was a special one.
Yeah, that was great. Yeah.